Before I begin, a gentle note. This is a story I want to share with you tonight. Names, places, and small details have been changed, but the heart of it, the loneliness, the love, the finding of home, that part is real to everyone who has ever felt forgotten. So pour yourself something warm, settle in, and let me tell you about the autumn. I lost everything, and the grandmother who somehow saw it all coming. I still remember the taste of that morning. Cold coffee from the diner's last pot, burn at the bottom, watery at the top. I had been drinking it for 2 years at Marlene's, standing on tired feet, refilling cups for truckers and farmers and folks just passing through. That Tuesday in October, I drank it knowing it would be my last cup as an employee. The diner was closing on Friday. The owner had sold the land to a gas station chain. We all got the same goodbye letter taped to the back door above the time clock. I was 19 years old. I had $43 in a coffee can under my bed. And the woman who had raised me from the time I was 8 years old was buried in the ground exactly 6 days before. If you have ever lost everything in a single week, you know what I mean when I say the world goes very quiet. It does not roar, it does not scream, it hushes itself like a room when someone is trying not to wake a sleeping child. My name is Ren Caldwell, and this is the story of the ruined farmhouse my grandmother left me, the one my brother laughed at, the one nobody wanted, the one that turned out to be hiding the most important secret of my life. The funeral was small, maybe 20 people standing under a gray Carolina sky, gathered between the weathered headstones of folks who had outlived their own names. A cold mist drifted down from the Blue Ridge. The minister kept his sermon short. Most of the mourners were strangers to me. Old women in long coats, 2 men in caps who took them off only when the prayer began. A woman with silver hair who pressed a tissue to her mouth and would not look at me. I stood at the back. I did not cry, not because I did not love her. I loved her more than I'd ever loved anyone. The pain was simply too deep for tears. Tears are for grief you can still touch. What I felt that day was the kind you cannot reach, like a stone dropped into a well that has no bottom. Grandma Opal had come into my life on a snowy December afternoon 11 years before. I was 8 years old, and I had been at Street Catherine's Children's Home for as long as I could remember. The hallways smelled like floor wax and old bread. The radiators clanged at night. There was a window at the end of the upstairs corridor where I would sit every Sunday afternoon and pretend to read a book while I watched the parking lot. Every car that pulled in was hope. Every car that pulled out without me was another goodbye I had not earned. By the time I was 7, I had stopped sitting at that window. Some disappointments get easier to survive when you stop expecting them. But then one Sunday in December, the front doors opened and a woman walked in with a tin of homemade cinnamon cookies. Her hair was the color of moonlight. Her hands were knotted with arthritis, but steady. She did not ask the front office about my grades. She did not ask about behavior reports. She did not ask if I was potty trained or if I had issues. She sat down beside me on the radiator bench and asked what book I was reading. It was the first real conversation I could remember having with an adult. She came back the next Sunday and the Sunday after that. And every Sunday for almost 2 years, while she fought the court for me, I did not know about that fight then. I only knew that she kept coming. And when the adoption papers were finally signed, she knelt down beside me on the linoleum floor of the children's home office, took both my hands in her old crooked ones, and whispered the words I would carry inside my chest for the rest of my life. "Sweetheart," she said, "I didn't come here looking for a child. I came here looking for you." 11 years later, I stood at her graveside and felt the same thing I had felt as a little girl at that window. The terrible feeling of being left behind, only this time it was worse because no one was coming back. The sky was the color of dishwater when I walked home from the cemetery. My apartment sat above a laundromat on the edge of town, 2 rooms and a hot plate, and the smell of dryer sheets always drifted up through the floorboards. That night, I sat at the small kitchen table with my coat still on. I did not turn on the lamp. The street light outside was enough to see by. I had no family left in this world, not really. There was Sterling, my adoptive brother, 29 years old now. Grandma Opal had taken him in when he was 4 years old, almost a decade before I came along. He was her first. By the time the court finally let her bring me home, Sterling was already 15, already a head taller than her, already gone most of the year on a scholarship to a fine boarding school down in Charlotte. He came back for Christmases. He came back for summers. He kissed Grandma on the cheek and called her ma'am and ate 3 helpings of her pot roast. But the farm was never quite home to him the way it became home to me. He was made for cities, for boardrooms, for the kind of life that has a doorman. By the time I was a teenager, he was running a real estate firm in Charlotte. He had a wife I had met exactly twice, named Caroline, who always looked at me like she was trying very hard to remember my name. He had a glass office on the 18th floor. He had a watch that cost more than my whole apartment. I had spent most of my life feeling invisible beside him. The phone rang at 7 o'clock. I almost did not answer. I thought it might be the diner manager or the landlord or somebody else with bad news to add to the pile. But I picked up and a soft, gravelly voice said my name. Miss Caldwell, this is Harlan Pickett. I was your grandmother's attorney. I had met him once years ago at a Thanksgiving table where he had eaten 3 slices of pie and told a story about a runaway mule. He had to be 80 by now. I need to read your grandmother's will to you and your brother tomorrow morning, he said. Can you come to my office in Hollow Ridge, 9 o'clock? Yes, sir. There was a pause on the line, the kind of pause that holds a held breath. Rin, he said, your grandma left some specific instructions. I just want you to come with an open heart. I sat in the dark for a long time after I hung up. I did not know it yet. But somewhere up in the hills, outside Hollow Ridge, behind the peeling walls of a forgotten farmhouse, my grandmother had been preparing for that phone call for years. And the secret she had hidden in those walls was about to change my life forever. Friend, before I tell you what happened the next morning, I want to ask you something. Have you ever sat in the dark at a kitchen table wondering what on earth comes next? With the bills stacked, the family gone, and $43 between you and the next month? Tell me in the comments. I want to know I am not the only one who has ever known that quiet. And if this story is already pulling on your heart, go ahead and tap that subscribe button, because I promise you what happened next, I never could have seen coming. Harlan Pickett's law office sat above the hardware store on Main Street in Hollow Ridge. The stairs creaked under my boots. The building smelled like old paper, percolator, coffee, and floor varnish that had been applied sometime during the Carter administration. A ceiling fan rattled in the corner of the front room. Yellowed blinds filtered the morning light in stripes across a worn wooden floor. Somewhere down the hall, a clock ticked. The kind of clock with weights and a pendulum, the kind that has measured out 1,000 small-town goodbyes. I sat in a cracked leather chair with my hands folded tight in my lap. I was wearing the same wool coat I had bought at the thrift store the winter before. The cuffs were starting to fray. Sterling came in 5 minutes late. He was wearing a navy suit that fit him the way money fits a person. His watch caught the light when he checked it. He carried himself the way men do when they have never been told no by a room. He nodded at me without smiling, took the chair across from mine, crossed one ankle over his knee, and pulled out his phone. I tried to remember the last time we had spoken without Grandma Opal in the room. I could not. Mr. Pickett came in carrying a thick folder. His hand shook a little. Age, I thought, or maybe just the weight of what he was about to do. Thank you both for coming, he said. He sat down behind his desk, adjusted his glasses. Your grandmother updated this will 14 months ago. She was very deliberate about every single line. Sterling was already smiling. I could see it from the corner of my eye. Mr. Pickett began to read. The first 10 minutes were small things. A pearl brooch to a cousin in Tennessee, a donation to the Methodist Church on Cedar Lane, a set of antique china to a friend named Beatrice. I listened and I waited, and my hands kept twisting in my lap. Then Mr. Pickett turned a page. To my grandson, Sterling Caldwell, he read, "I leave my residence at 412 Lake Norman Drive, including all furnishings, the boat, both vehicles, and the financial accounts listed in Appendix B." Sterling's smile widened, just slightly, just enough. The lake house was worth well over $1 million. The investments, I would learn later, were close to $800,000 more. He had inherited a fortune. Mr. Pickett turned another page. He paused, he looked up at me, and his old eyes were soft in a way that almost made me afraid. To my granddaughter, Wren Caldwell, I leave the property located at 148 Willow Creek Road, Hollow Ridge, North Carolina. 87 acres of land, the farmhouse, the barn, all outbuildings, and the entirety of its contents. Silence. Then Sterling laughed. He actually laughed. The sound bounced off the wooden walls of that old office like a stone skipping on cold water. "You're kidding me," he said. Mr. Pickett did not look at him. "That place got condemned, didn't it? Years ago?" "No," the old lawyer said quietly. "It did not." Sterling shook his head. He was grinning now, the way a man grins at a joke that has finally landed. He looked at me with something close to pity, maybe even close to amusement. "Wren," he said, "honey, that farmhouse is a wreck. Grandma hadn't lived there in 20 years. The roof leaks, the well's probably contaminated. You're going to spend more money tearing it down than you'd ever make on the land." I did not answer. Mr. Pickett slid a manila envelope across the desk toward me. It was sealed. My name was written on the front in handwriting I would have known anywhere. Slanted, careful, old-fashioned letters. "Your grandmother asked me to give you this personally," Mr. Pickett said. And she was very clear, "Sterling, only Wren." Here's the first thing I want you to notice, because I did not notice it then, but I do now. The way Mr. Pickett said "only Wren," like he was protecting something, like he was a man holding a candle in a windstorm and trying very hard to keep the flame alive. Sterling stood up, he buttoned his jacket, he smoothed the front of it. "Well," he said. He smiled at me. It was the kind of smile that did not reach his eyes. "Tell you what, baby sister, if you ever decide that pile of rotten lumber is too much for you, just call me. I'll take it off your hands for $30,000. Cash, just to help you out." Then he leaned down and kissed the top of my head. That kiss felt like a goodbye. He walked out and the door clicked shut behind him, and the office went very quiet again. Just the ticking clock, just the fan. I stared at the envelope on the desk. "Mr. Pickett," I said, "why would she leave me that house?" The old man took off his glasses. He folded them carefully. He set them on his desk. "Sweetheart," he said, "a better question might be, why did she make absolutely certain nobody else could ever lay a hand on it?" I did not understand what he meant. Not then. I took the envelope and the deed and the heavy brass ring of keys, and I drove the rental car I could barely afford back to my apartment above the laundromat. There was an eviction notice taped to my door when I got home. The building was being sold. I had 30 days. I sat on the edge of my bed that night with everything I owned packed into 2 duffel bags and 1 cardboard box, and I opened the envelope. There was a map inside, old, hand-drawn, folded so many times the creases were splitting. There was a photograph, a girl, maybe 8 years old, with a messy braid and a missing front tooth, standing on the porch of a white farmhouse. Her small hand was wrapped tightly around the hand of an older woman with silver hair. The girl was grinning like she had just been told a secret. That girl was me. That woman was Grandma Opal. And I had no memory of that photograph being taken. I turned it over. There were 7 words written on the back in the careful, slanted handwriting I would have known in the dark. "Someday this place will bring you home." The tears came then, for the first time since the funeral, for the first time in weeks. They came hot and fast, and they would not stop. I sat on the floor of that little apartment with the photograph pressed to my chest, and I cried until the streetlight outside flickered off at sunrise. In the morning, I packed my 2 duffel bags in my cardboard box. I dropped the apartment keys through the landlord's mail slot, and I walked down to the Greyhound station with the brass ring of keys jingling in my coat pocket. I bought a one-way ticket to Hollow Ridge. If you had been with me on that bus, you would have seen a 19-year-old girl with red eyes and a thrift store coat watching the Blue Ridge Mountains rise up out of the morning fog. You would have seen her press her forehead against the cold window glass. You would have seen her whisper to nobody, "Okay, Grandma, I'm coming." Now, let me ask you something. If you had been in my shoes that morning, no job, no money, no family, but a brother who laughed at you, would you have stayed in that bus seat all the way to the end of the line? Or would you have gotten off at the first stop, gone back to whatever you knew, and tried to start over the safe way? Tell me in the comments, because what I did next, I am still not sure was the brave choice, or just the desperate one. The Greyhound dropped me off at a cracked stretch of pavement beside a convenience store with a Coca-Cola sign hanging crooked above the door. The bus pulled away, and the silence that settled around me was not a town silence, it was a country silence. Wind through pines, the distant lowing of cattle, the far-off whine of a tractor. I shouldered my duffel bags and looked at the map. The farmhouse was 3 miles out a county road that barely showed up on modern maps. I started walking. About a mile in, a dusty blue pickup truck slowed beside me. The driver leaned across the bench seat to roll down the passenger window. She was a woman somewhere past 60 with a steel gray braid down her back, sun-darkened arms, and a green John Deere cap pulled low over her eyes. "You Opal Caldwell's granddaughter?" she asked. I stopped walking. I had not told a soul I was coming. "Yes, ma'am." She nodded once, like she had won a small bet with herself. "Get in, bags in the back." I hesitated. She saw it. She softened. "Name's Delphine Hartwick. Everybody calls me Della. I run the feed store in town. Your grandma was the best friend I ever had on this earth, and I promised her if you ever came home, I'd be the one to fetch you the rest of the way. Get in." I got in. The pickup smelled like hay and engine oil and a perfume she must have put on 40 years ago and stuck with. She drove with one wrist hooked over the steering wheel. The road wound up into the foothills, past a rusted silo, past a barn with the roof half caved in, past mailboxes that leaned at every angle the wind had pushed them. "How long did you know her?" I asked. Della was quiet for a long moment. "Since 1971, she said. She came back from the Army and bought that farm with her own money. 23 years old, and she walked into the feed store in a pair of work boots and told my daddy she needed 8 hens and a rooster, and she didn't care if any of them were pretty. She just wanted them to lay. Daddy laughed, said he liked her right off. I was 13. I remember thinking she was the bravest thing I'd ever seen. "The Army?" I said. Della glanced at me. "You didn't know? Your grandma was a nurse over in Vietnam, 2 tours. Came back with shrapnel in her shoulder and a quiet that took her about 15 years to get out from under." I did not speak. 11 years I had lived with that woman. 11 years of Sunday dinners and birthday cakes and her crooked old hands brushing my hair before bed. And she had never once told me. She didn't talk about it, Della said gently, not even with me, mostly. But she was a different kind of strong, your grandma, the kind that doesn't need to tell you how it got that way. We turned off the county road onto a dirt lane. The trees closed in, the light went green and gold. And then we came around the last bend, and Della slowed the truck. "There she is," she said softly. 148 Willow Creek. I have looked at that farmhouse 1,000 times in my memory since that afternoon. But the first time, the very first time, it knocked the breath out of me. It was tired. Sterling had not been wrong about that. The white paint had peeled away in long curling strips that looked like sunburned skin. The front porch sagged on one side. Honeysuckle vines crawled up the south wall and over part of the roof. Two of the upstairs windows were boarded shut with plywood gone soft in the weather. The barn behind the house leaned a few degrees off, true. But the bones were good. The Riverstone chimney stood straight and proud. The roofline was real, cedar shake under all that moss. The fields rolled out on either side, gone to seed and goldenrod and wild aster, and beyond them the Blue Ridge rose up blue and soft like the rim of a great bowl. Della killed the engine. Your grandma's great-grandmother built this house. You know, she said 1,881. Hands and hammers. But you should hear me out about something. Here in this hollow, when Opal Caldwell chose you, sweetheart, she chose you all the way back. She told me once that blood was just a starting line. The rest was who you walked with. Caldwell women have been keeping this place standing for 144 years, and now that's you. I stepped out of the truck. The grass was up past my knees. A wren, a real one, brown and quick, flicked off the porch railing and disappeared into the honeysuckle. Della laughed under her breath. Well, I'll be. She knew you were coming. I walked to the porch. The steps groaned under my weight. The brass keys felt warm in my hand. I picked the largest one, slid it into the front door lock, and turned. It resisted. I leaned my shoulder into the door, and with a deep, soft, settling sound, it gave way. A breath of cool air spilled out around me. It smelled of cedar and old paper and the ghost of something baked a long time ago. Cinnamon, maybe, or apples. Furniture stood under white sheets. Dust danced through the bars of light pouring through the dirty windows. A grandfather clock stood silent against one wall, its hands frozen at 4:20. The stone fireplace stretched the width of the parlor, and above it, a single framed photograph. I crossed to it slowly. It was a wedding picture, a young woman in a high-collared dress, a man in a Union cavalry uniform, both of them barely 20 years old. Both of them looking straight at the camera the way people looked at cameras 140 years ago, like the picture might steal something they could not get back. On the brass plate at the bottom of the frame, two names, Clara and Josiah Caldwell, 1,881. The first Caldwell woman to live in this house. I stood there with my duffel bags at my feet and the dust drifting around me, and I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Not since I was 8 years old, sitting on a radiator bench at street, Catherine's looking up into the face of a woman who had walked in with a tin of cinnamon cookies. I felt seen by a house, by a photograph, by 140 years of women I had never met, by a grandmother who had told her best friend that I belonged to all of them. Della was standing in the doorway behind me. "I'll let you be," she said softly. "There's groceries in a box on the kitchen counter, eggs and bread and butter and a jar of my chow chow. The power's on, the well's been tested. Pastor Whitlock will come by tomorrow if you want company. If you don't, just don't answer the door. We're patient folks up here." She paused. "Welcome home, Ren." She left. I stood alone in the parlor of the only house in the world that was now legally mine, and I listened to the soft settle of old wood breathing in the afternoon. That first night, I lit an oil lamp from the pantry and slept on a horsehair sofa under a quilt I found in a cedar chest. The quilt was stitched with names along the border: Clara, Margaret, Sarah, Loretta, Opal, Caldwell women who had each added their own square. And at the very corner, on a fresh white patch of cotton, 3 letters had been embroidered in pale yellow thread. Jeja. She had stitched my initials into a quilt I had never seen, into a place I had never been. She had been ready for me to come home a long, long time before I ever knew I needed one. I cried myself to sleep on that sofa. But for the first time in weeks, I did not cry from loss. I cried because somebody, somewhere, had been waiting for me. I spent the next 3 days cleaning. I pulled the sheets off furniture I had only seen in dreams. I swept floors that had not felt a broom in years. I scrubbed the kitchen counters with vinegar and hot water until the old tile turned the color of cream again. I washed every dish in the cabinet blue willow, every plate of it, and stacked them gently back on the open shelves. The grandfather clock turned out to need only a wind and a gentle nudge to come back to life. I watched the pendulum swing for 10 full minutes after I started it. It sounded like a heartbeat returning to a body. The pantry was stocked with mason jars of preserves, peaches, blackberries, sweet pickles, chow chow, each one labeled in Grandma Opal's slanted hand with the year. Some went back to 2018. Some were from just last summer. She had been canning food for a house she did not live in. For a granddaughter who did not yet know she was coming. On the fourth morning I found the floor plan. I was dusting shelves in the small study off the parlor. The room had a worn leather chair, a roll-top desk, and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves on 3 walls. I was pulling down a thick leather Bible to wipe the dust off the top when a folded yellow paper slipped from between the pages and drifted to the floor. I picked it up. It was a hand-drawn floor plan of the house. Every room was there. The parlor, the dining room, the kitchen, the pantry, the 2 upstairs bedrooms, the study where I was standing. But there was a room I did not recognize. A small rectangular space tucked behind the pantry wall between the kitchen and the back porch. It had no door on the plan, no window, just a small notation in faded pencil in handwriting I did not yet know was Clara Caldwell's, dated November 1881. The quiet room, for the one who chooses to stay. I stood very still. My pulse was loud in my ears. I walked into the pantry, shelves of mason jars, sacks of flour, an old broom, a coat hook on the wall with a faded Carhartt jacket still hanging on it. Nothing unusual, but when I pressed my hand against the back wall of the pantry, I felt something I had not noticed before. A draft, a thin, cool whisper of air slipping through a crack between 2 boards. I went and found a flathead screwdriver in a kitchen drawer. My hands were shaking. I do not mind telling you. I was a 19-year-old girl in an empty house in the hills, and I was about to pry open a wall. The wooden panel resisted. Then it groaned. Then, with a small puff of dust, it shifted sideways on hidden tracks. A narrow opening appeared. Darkness waited beyond. I lit the oil lamp and I crawled through. The passage was short, 3 feet, maybe 4. Then it widened. I stood up, I lifted the lamp, and the breath left my body. Books, hundreds of them, floor-to-ceiling shelves on every wall, leather-bound journals, some of them so old the spines were soft as cloth, tin boxes filled with letters tied in faded ribbon, wooden crates of photographs, brown and gold and silver, going back farther than I could have imagined, hat boxes, pressed flowers in glass frames, a spinning wheel in the corner under a cotton sheet. In the center of the room stood a wooden writing desk. On the desk lay a single open journal, and resting on the journal was a small folded piece of paper with my name on it. I sat down at the desk on legs that would not quite hold me. I picked up the paper, I unfolded it. The handwriting was Grandma Opal's, but newer than the wedding photo letters, sharper, written with the hand of a woman who had recently been ill but still steady. It read, "My darling Wren, if you are reading this, then you found the door I always believed you would. You were the only one with the listening kind of heart this room required. What you are about to read is your inheritance. Not the house, not the land. These journals, these women, they have been waiting in the dark for 140 years. They are not your blood, sweetheart. But blood is only a starting line. They have been mine, and now I am giving them to you. That makes them yours too. Sit down, take your time, get to know them, and know this. The greatest gift I can give you is not money. Sterling has the money. The greatest gift I can give you is the proof that you were never alone, not for a single day of your 19 years. I loved you before I ever walked through the doors of street. Catherine's, I simply had not met you yet. I did meet you, and it was the joy of my life. I will see you again someday. All my love, every word of it, until the day I see you again. Grandma, I read that letter 3 times. I do not remember the 3rd time. I only remember sitting in that chair, surrounded by 140 years of women, with my forehead pressed against the wood of that desk, sobbing the way a body sobs when it is finally safe to. Friend, if this story is reaching you tonight, I want you to do me a small favor. Hit that subscribe button before you keep going. Because this is the part where the world I had just found started to be threatened, and I do not want you to miss what comes next. And while you are down there, tell me something. Have you ever found something hidden in your own family's history? An old letter, a photograph, a name you had never heard? Tell me in the comments. These are the stories that change us, and we need to hear each other. Now let me tell you what happened the morning the trouble walked up onto my porch. It was a Tuesday. About 2 weeks after I found the hidden room, I had been reading every night by lamplight. I had met Clara, who came to North Carolina at 16 as a Union officer's bride and learned to deliver calves by lantern light her first winter. I had met Margaret, who walked 4 miles through a snowstorm in February 1918 with her midwife bag to deliver a baby boy while the influenza was taking 3 neighbors a week. I had met Sarah, who taught reading and arithmetic in a 1-room schoolhouse for 38 years, and who in 1959, against everything her town told her was right, opened her schoolhouse on Saturdays to teach black children who had been turned away from the white school across the county. I had met Loretta, Grandma Opal's mother, who had buried 2 infants and survived the Great Depression on what she could grow. And I had met my grandmother, Opal Margaret Caldwell, Army nurse, 2 tours in Vietnam, came home and built a life out of chickens and quilts and a heart she did not let many people see. I had stayed up most of the night before reading her field journal from 1969. I was on the front porch with a cup of coffee when the black Cadillac came up the dirt lane. It pulled to a stop at the foot of the porch. A man got out. He was tall, mid-50s, silver at the temples, a charcoal suit cut for a courtroom, not a country road. He came up the steps with the smile of a man who had practiced it in mirrors. "Miss Caldwell," he said, "I am so sorry to drop in unannounced. My name is Royce Hadley. I represent Hadley Development Group out of Atlanta." He held out a business card. I did not take it. He set it on the porch railing. "I knew your grandmother years ago," he said. "Lovely woman, stubborn as a fence post." He smiled when he said it, the way men smile when they want you to know they have been told no before and did not enjoy it. "What do you want, Mr. Hadley?" Straight to it, I like that. He looked out across the fields, across my grandmother's fields. "I represent a consortium that has been quietly acquiring land in this valley for about 4 years. Your grandmother's property is the last piece we need." "For what?" "A resort, 300 rooms, conference facility, a small private airstrip, 18-hole golf course. It would bring 400 jobs to a county that has been bleeding population for 2 decades. It is not for sale." He smiled at me kindly, the way a man smiles at a child who has just refused to put down a sharp object. "Miss Caldwell, I am authorized to offer you $150,000 cash today. I have the wire transfer paperwork in my car. You sign, and by tomorrow morning, you have a life. A real one, college, a car, an apartment in Asheville with a view. You walk away from a roof that is going to fail this winter and a heating bill you cannot afford." He was not wrong about any of it. I had $11 in my pocket. I had a propane tank that needed filling. I had a roof that had already started weeping in 3 places during the last hard rain. I looked at him. My grandmother said no to you, didn't she? His smile cooled, just at the edges. Many times. Why? Because she was a sentimental woman, Miss Caldwell, with very poor financial sense. I am sure you are a much more practical young lady. I felt something settle in my chest that I had never felt before. Not anger exactly, something deeper, something older, like every Caldwell woman in that hidden room had just leaned forward to listen. Mr. Hadley, I said, I would like you to leave my porch. He stood there for a long moment. Then he picked up his business card, slid it back into his pocket, tipped his head at me politely. You will reconsider, he said. Winter's up here harder than you think, Miss Caldwell. I will be in touch. He drove away. I sat down on the porch step. My hands were shaking. That afternoon, I emailed Silas Bramwell. I had met Silas 3 years before in a community history workshop the Buncombe County Library hosted one weekend. He had been a master's student then, the kind of awkward, lanky young man who got excited about old census records and tintype photographs. He had asked for my email when the workshop ended. I had never written him. I wrote him now. I said, I think I have found something. I do not know what to do with it. Could you come and look? He wrote back in 23 minutes. I am in my truck. He arrived 2 days later, pulled up the dirt lane in a faded red Ford with the bed full of file boxes and one extremely grumpy gray cat in a carrier on the passenger seat. He climbed out wearing wire-rimmed glasses that sat crooked on his nose, a flannel shirt buttoned wrong by one hole, and the same eager half smile I remembered. Wren Caldwell, he said, you look exactly the same. You look exactly the same, I said. I was hoping for taller. That made me laugh. It was the first time I had laughed in a month. I led him through the house, through the pantry, through the secret panel, and I watched his face change. He went silent. He walked the perimeter of the hidden room 3 times without speaking. He touched the spines of journals without taking them down. He stopped in front of Sarah Caldwell's school registers from 1959. He stopped in front of Margaret's midwifery log from 1918. He stopped in front of Clara's wedding diary from 1881. When he finally turned around, his eyes were wet. Wren, he said, do you know what this is? It is my family. He shook his head slowly. It is also one of the most significant private collections of Appalachian women's history I have ever heard of. There are universities that would empty their endowments for a chance at this room. It is firsthand, multi-generational testimony of how this region actually lived through the Civil War, through the 1918 flu, through Jim Crow, through the war your grandmother served in, through everything. I sat down on the corner of the writing desk. Silas, I said, there is a man who wants to buy this farm and build a resort on top of it. He looked at me. Well, Wren, he said softly, then we are not going to let him. We worked for 10 days straight. Silas slept on the parlor sofa. I made him coffee and grits and apple butter on toast. We cataloged, we photographed, we dated documents. He stretched conservation tissue between the pages of the most fragile journals. He called 2 of his professors at Vanderbilt. They drove up the next weekend with 3 graduate students in a station wagon full of acid-free boxes. They worked with us in the lamplight. They cried more than once. The youngest of them, a girl named Hallie, sat in the corner of the hidden room one night and whispered, these women. That is when I started to understand this was not just my grandmother's gift to me. This was a gift that wanted to keep being given. The first letter from Sterling's attorney arrived on a Friday. It was a formal notice of intent to contest the will. The argument, written in 3 pages of careful legal English, was that the contents of the hidden room, the journals, the letters, The photographs constituted intellectual and historical property of significant monetary value, and that this property had not been specifically itemized in the will and therefore should be considered part of the general estate, of which Sterling was the primary heir. I sat at the kitchen table with the letter in my hand. Then I called Mr. Pickett. His voice on the phone was the steadiest thing I had heard in days. "Wren," he said, "I want you to listen to me carefully. Your grandmother thought of this. She thought of all of it. Come to my office on Monday. Bring Silas. There is something I need to show both of you." That weekend was the worst weekend. The roof gave way over the back bedroom in a Saturday night thunderstorm. I woke up to the sound of water hitting the floor. I ran upstairs with every pot and pan I owned. I sat on the floor of that ruined bedroom for 2 hours, listening to the rain drum into my buckets, with the letter from Sterling's lawyer balled up in my coat pocket, and a property tax bill for $4,200 due in 60 days sitting on the kitchen counter downstairs. I picked up my phone 3 times that night to call Royce Hadley, to say yes, to make it all stop. 3 times I put the phone back down. Sunday morning, Della Hartwick's pickup truck came up the lane. She had Pastor Whitlock with her and Tom Mercer from the farm next door and his wife Loretta, and Doc Renfro, the old veterinarian who Grandma Opal had played gin rummy with every Thursday night for 40 years. They had ladders and tarps and a casserole. "Get out of the way, baby," Della said. "We got work to do." Tom Mercer climbed up onto my roof with a hammer in his belt. Doc Renfro stayed in the kitchen and reheated the casserole and made me sit down at the table whether I wanted to or not. Loretta Mercer sat down across from me and slid an envelope across the wood. "Tom and I have been talking," she said. "Your grandma sat with our boy through 8 months of chemotherapy in '02. She drove him to Chapel Hill once a week. She read to him in that infusion chair. We owe her. We've been waiting 23 years for a way to pay it back." I opened the envelope. There were $3,800 inside. "That is for your property tax bill," Loretta said, "and before you tell me you cannot accept it, you should know that Della took up a collection. There are folks in this valley who haven't been to your farm in 20 years who put a 20 in that envelope. So you are not just taking money from Tom and me, you are taking it from a community that wants you to stay." I could not speak. Doc Renfro slid a plate of casserole in front of me. "Eat," he said. "Your skin and bones, child. Your grandma would have my hide." Pastor Whitlock said grace. I sat at that table with 5 people I had barely known for 2 months, eating a casserole somebody else had made, while a man I had never met before that morning hammered a fresh tarp over my leaking roof, and I cried so hard I could not lift my fork. Have you ever in your whole life been picked up by people you did not earn? Strangers who showed up because somebody you loved had once shown up for them? I want you to tell me about it in the comments, because I believe this kind of love is everywhere in this country. We just do not tell each other about it enough. Monday morning, Silas and I drove into Hollow Ridge. Mr. Pickett was waiting for us. He led us into his back office and locked the door behind us. He set a thick file on the desk between us. 3 years ago, he said, your grandmother came in and asked me a question. She asked me how to legally protect a body of historical work from being treated as personal property, from being sold off in pieces, from being broken up after she was gone. He opened the file. What we built over 4 months of work is a thing called a historical preservation trust. Your grandmother created it in 2022. She funded it with a small initial deposit. She itemized by hand every document, every journal, every letter, every photograph in that hidden room. She named you, Wren, as the sole trustee for life. He slid a thick legal document across the desk. It is not part of her estate. It was never part of her estate. It has not been since 2022. Sterling has no claim to it. He never did. I stared at it. He is going to find out, Silas said quietly, and then Mr. Pickett smiled. It was a tired smile, the smile of an old man who had been waiting a long time to do this. and then his attorney will withdraw the suit because he will not win it. Your grandmother was a careful woman, son. She was a very, very careful woman. I do not remember the drive back to the farm. I only remember the way the late autumn light fell across the fields when we came around the last bend, and the way the White House stood there waiting for us, and the way Silas reached across the seat and squeezed my hand once, just once, the way a friend does. That night in the hidden room, I opened the iron safe in the cellar. I had been saving it. I had known somehow that I would need to wait until I was ready. The safe stood against the back wall of the stone cellar behind a row of mason jars. Heavy, black, combination dial set into the front, no keyhole. I tried birthdays, I tried anniversaries, I tried the day she had adopted me, I tried Margaret's birth year and Clara's and Loretta's. Nothing. I sat down on the cold stone floor and rested my forehead against the cool metal of the door, and I thought, not about dates, not about numbers, about rooms, specifically about one room. The radiator bench at Street Catherine's, the end of the upstairs corridor, outside room 12. The room where she had sat down beside an 8-year-old girl with a missing front tooth and a book she was only pretending to read. I turned the dial right to 12, left past 0, back to 1, right to 2. The mechanism clicked. The door swung open. I want to tell you what was in that safe. 3 leather photo albums, 40 years of pictures I had never seen of myself. Grandma had been collecting photographs of me from Street Catherine's, from every school photo day, from every place anyone had ever sent her one. A Polaroid of me at age 4, asleep in a hospital bed where I had been treated for a fever the system never told her about. A school picture of me in 2nd grade with my hair in a crooked ponytail. The first piece of artwork I ever made that anyone kept. She had been watching me for years before she ever walked through that door. 3 treasury bonds, issued in 1998, the year after I was born, held in a trust she had funded $1 at a time every month for 21 years. Total value at maturity, $91,400. Enough to fix the roof, enough to pay the taxes, enough to keep the lights on for years. A wooden cigar box. And inside that cigar box, tied with a pale blue ribbon, 47 envelopes. Each envelope was addressed to me, to Ren age 4, to Ren age 5, to Ren age 6, all the way to Ren age 11. 47 letters my grandmother had written me across 8 long years of trying. Some months she wrote twice, some months she could not bear to. Every one of them sent, every one of them returned. Each envelope had a red stamp across the front. Undeliverable, return to sender. She had kept them all. She had saved every single one for the day I might finally read them. I picked up the first envelope to Ren, age 4. I slid my finger under the flap. I unfolded the paper and I read, "My darling Ren, today I tried to see you again. They told me no again. They said I was not a relative. They said I had no standing. I came home and I cried for 3 hours in the kitchen. Then I baked you a birthday cake anyway, even though I cannot give it to you. I lit 4 candles and I sang happy birthday to an empty room. I imagined you blowing them out. I imagined what you would wish for. I want you to know I am still trying. I will keep trying. I am not going to give up. There is a room in this house I am keeping for you. There is a quilt I am stitching with your initials on it. Do not give up on the world, sweetheart. There is someone out here in it fighting for you. Love always." The old woman, I read until the lamp grew dim. I read until the cellar grew cold. I read every single one of those 47 letters that night with my back against the stone wall and the photographs of myself spread out around me, and I understood something for the first time in 19 years. I had never been alone, not for one single day. I had only ever been a child whose grandmother could not reach her. Friend, If you are still with me, I need you to take a slow breath right now, because this is the part where I started to understand what my whole life had really been. And I want you, wherever you are tonight, to remember that there might be someone in your story like that. Someone who fought for you when you did not know it. A mother, an aunt, a neighbor. Someone whose love did not always get to find you, but who loved you anyway. I want you to tell me about that person in the comments. Use their name, speak it out loud. The people who fought for us deserve to be remembered. The next 2 weeks unfolded the way I imagine winter sunrises do for people who farm. Slow, steady, cold at the edges, but warming. Sterling's attorney withdrew the suit on a Wednesday. There was no apology. There was simply a one-page letter from a Charlotte law firm with 3 names on the letterhead, stating that the petitioner was electing not to pursue the matter further. Mr. Pickett called me the same afternoon to read it to me over the phone. That, sweetheart, he said, is what victory sounds like in legal work. Very quiet. But Royce Hadley did not go quietly. A week later, the county code enforcement officer came up the lane in a white truck with the state seal on the door. He climbed out with a clipboard. He was a young man, maybe 25, and he would not meet my eyes. Miss Caldwell, he said, we have received a citizen complaint about structural integrity. I am required to do an inspection. I knew where the complaint had come from. I knew before the man opened his clipboard. He walked the property for an hour. He took photographs of the still patched roof, of the leaning barn, of a cracked porch step Tom Mercer had not yet gotten to. He wrote things down in a slow, careful hand. When he was done, he turned to me on the porch and finally met my eyes. Miss Caldwell, he said, I have been instructed by my supervisor to issue a notice of unsafe occupancy. You have 30 days to bring this structure up to county code, or I will be required by law to post the building as condemned. Who is your supervisor? I asked. The young man swallowed hard. He looked down at the porch boards. Ma'am, he said, I am sorry. I am very sorry. He told me what to write before I even got in the truck. I called Silas. Silas called the local newspaper. The reporter, a woman named Joanne Vance, drove up the lane in a hatchback that looked older than she was. She had her hair in a long gray braid, like Della. She had a notebook full of shorthand, the kind nobody writes in anymore. She listened to me tell the story for 4 hours, drinking coffee at my kitchen table, asking questions only when she needed to. She asked about the rock outcropping behind the south pasture too, the one Grandma had always called the Old Stones. Joanne knew the way old reporters know things, that the state archaeologists had flagged that ridge 30 years ago as a possible Cherokee ceremonial site. Your grandmother, Joanne, said gently, never let a soul disturb that ridge. Did you know that? I did not, but I was learning that there were many things Opal had quietly protected without ever asking to be thanked. When I was done telling her the rest, Joanne set her pen down. Sweetheart, she said, has anyone been in the hidden room yet besides you and that boy from Vanderbilt? No. Could you stand to let one more person in? I took her in. She walked through it the way Silas had. She did not cry, but she stood for a long time in front of Sarah Caldwell's school registers from 1959. The pages that had the names of every black child Sarah had taught in secret on Saturdays, 66 years before. Joanne wrote her story in 3 days. It ran on a Sunday. The headline was, The Hidden Library of Willow Creek, a Caldwell woman comes home. It included a photograph of me on the porch with Della Hartwick and Tom Mercer behind me. It told the story of Clara, of Margaret, of Sarah, of Loretta, of Opal. It told the story of the resort and the man who wanted to bury that history under an 18-hole golf course. By Tuesday, the story had been picked up by the regional public television station. By Friday, the North Carolina Department of Natural and Cultural Resources had sent a letter to Royce Hadley's company and copied the county commissioners The letter informed all parties that 148 Willow Creek Road had been officially submitted for emergency review as a candidate for the State Register of Historic Places, citing the unique multi-generational documentary collection housed within the property and the protected status of the Old Stones Ridge on the southern boundary. The condemnation notice was rescinded. The resort plans collapsed. Royce Hadley sent me one last letter. It was very short. It read, "You will regret this. Sentimentality has a cost. R.H." I did not write him back. I tacked the letter to the inside of the pantry door. Beside it, I tacked the 7 words from the back of the photograph my grandmother had left me in that first envelope. "Someday this place will bring you home." I let those 2 notes hang there together so I could see them every morning, so I would always remember which one had won. Spring came hard and green into the hollow that year. The dogwoods on the south slope bloomed first, then the redbuds, then the wild plums along the creek. I walked the property in the mornings with a cup of coffee in my hand, and I learned the land the way Grandma Opal must have learned it her first spring. Where the deer crossed, where the wood thrush nested, where the soil was richest, where the old cherry tree leaned over the well house. Silas finished his semester at Vanderbilt and drove back up in May. This time, he brought more than the gray cat. He brought a U-Haul. "I have been thinking," he said, standing in my kitchen with his hands in his pockets, looking everywhere except at me, "if you are going to run a properly accredited historical archive out of this house, you are going to need a full-time archivist on the premises." And I happen to know one who would work for room and board and the occasional plate of grits. I looked at him. He looked at me. He was blushing under his glasses. He stayed through April. He stayed through May. He fixed the porch step Tom Mercer had not gotten to. He learned to make biscuits from Della's recipe, though hers were always better. He sat on the porch with me in the evenings while the fireflies came up out of the pasture. He did not ask me for anything I was not ready to give. One night in late June, a thunderstorm rolled down out of the Blue Ridge, and the power went out, and we sat in the dark parlor with the lightning flashing across the hidden room's open doorway. He reached across the space between us and took my hand. He did not say anything. I did not need him to. I was 19 years old, and for the first time in my life, somebody had asked nothing of me except to be still beside him. I want to tell you that is its own kind of love story. The quiet kind. The kind my grandmother would have known on sight. The Opal Caldwell Legacy Archive opened its doors to the public in September, almost a year to the day after my grandmother had been buried under that gray Carolina sky. The dedication ceremony was held on the front lawn, folding chairs in rows. A small stage Tom Mercer built out of pallet wood and white sheets. Della made enough chow-chow to feed a county. Pastor Whitlock said grace. The mayor of Hollow Ridge cut a green ribbon. Della had braided herself. About 400 people came. I did not give a long speech. I am not good at long speeches. I stood at the microphone with my hands shaking, and I said only this: "My name is Ren Caldwell. I was an orphan until I was 8 years old. My grandmother chose me, and then when she died, she chose me again. This farmhouse is not mine, it is hers. And it is theirs." I gestured at the house behind me, at the 140 years of women inside it. "I am only its keeper. I am going to do my best." That was all. People clapped for a long time anyway. 3 weeks after the dedication, I drove down to Street Catherine's Children's Home with the school bus I had rented for the day. I had called the director the month before. I had told her I wanted to host the older girls for an afternoon at the farm, 12 to 16. The ones who had been there the longest, the ones I knew without saying it, who were most likely to age out and end up where I had ended up. Above a laundromat, $43 to their name. 10 girls climbed onto that bus. They were nervous. They sat near the windows. They held their elbows. I recognized that posture. I had worn it for 10 years. We drove up into the hollow. The October light was the color of honey on the mountains. The leaves were turning. The girls looked out the windows and said nothing. I met them on the porch. I showed them the kitchen. I showed them the parlor. I showed them the wedding photograph of Clara and Josiah Caldwell, 1881. And then I took them into the hidden room. I watched their faces. I watched the shift. I watched the way one girl reached out and touched the spine of Sarah Caldwell's 1,959 school register and then quickly drew her hand back like she had been told not to. You can touch them, I said softly. They were written by women who would want you to. There was one girl among them, 13 years old, small for her age, quiet. Her name was Juniper Ashby, June. She stood for a long time in front of Margaret Caldwell's midwifery journal. When she finally turned around, her eyes were wet. "Miss Caldwell," she said, "will anybody ever remember our stories?" The room got very still. The other girls were watching her. Some of them were watching me. I crossed the room. I knelt down beside her. "Sweetheart," I said, "your story matters right now, today, in this room, to me. And one day, somebody is going to write yours down too, and another little girl is going to read it. And she is going to feel less alone because you were here." June did not say anything. She just nodded. And then she did the bravest thing. She put her arms around my neck and she hugged me. I held on to a 13-year-old stranger in a hidden room full of journals in a farmhouse my grandmother had been preparing for me before I was born. And I thought, this is what she meant. This is what I came home for. That night, after the school bus had taken the girls back to street, after Silas had fallen asleep in the parlor reading chair with the gray cat on his chest, I walked out alone into the hidden room with a small candle and I sat down at Clara Caldwell's writing desk. I picked up a fresh blank journal Silas had bought me at a bookstore in Asheville, soft brown leather, hand-stitched binding, the kind of journal a Caldwell woman might recognize. I opened to the first page and I began to write. I wrote, "My name is Ren Caldwell. I was not born into this name. I was given it on a December afternoon when I was 8 years old by a woman who had been waiting for me. She was raised by Loretta, who was raised by Sarah, who was the daughter of Margaret, who was the daughter-in-law of Clara. They are not my blood, but Opal told me once that blood is just a starting line. They are my family. We have been keeping a house in these hills since 1881. We have been keeping a hidden room since 1881. And today I started writing in it because the women who came before me believed I was theirs. And three things happened in the weeks before my brother called. The first was that the public television feature aired on a Sunday evening. Della told me later that half the valley watched it together at the Methodist Church Social Hall because Pastor Whitlock had wheeled out the big screen. They cried, she said. Grown men cried. The second was that Sterling's wife mailed me a card. It was a plain white card. Inside, in a careful hand I did not know, she had written, "Ren." I saw the story. He has not been able to look me in the eyes since. I think he is finally ready to be the brother she wanted him to be. Please be patient with him. Caroline. The third was that I drove down to the cemetery in Hollow Ridge on a Wednesday morning with a small bunch of asters from the garden. I sat down in the grass beside Grandma Opal's headstone. I told her about the archive. I told her about the girls from Street, Catherine's. I told her about Silas. And I told her, last of all, that I thought I was ready to forgive my brother whenever he was ready to ask. She did not answer. But the wind moved through the cedars the way it always does up here. And I felt the way I always do, that she had heard. The phone call came on a Thursday afternoon. I had been outside in the garden. Della had helped me clear. I came in dusty with dirt under my fingernails. The phone on the kitchen wall was ringing. I picked it up. It was Sterling. I had not heard his voice in 11 months. "Ren," he said. He sounded different, older, somehow quieter. "Sterling." There was a long pause. "I saw the feature on public television," he said. Caroline showed it to me. I had to watch it twice. I had to sit down in the kitchen and watch it twice. I did not answer. It was a good piece. His voice broke a little. He cleared his throat. Ren, listen, I owe you an apology. I should have called a long time ago. I thought she gave me the better inheritance. I really thought she had, and I was angry at her for what I thought she did to you. I was angry at her for years, Ren. And I see, now I had it backwards. I had it backwards from the start. I sat down at the kitchen table. The light through the window was the color of butter. It is, all right, Sterling. No, he said, it is not. But thank you for saying so. We were quiet on the line together for a moment. Hey, Ren, he said finally. Yeah, would it be all right if I came up sometime, maybe Christmas? I would like to see it, the room, the house, all of it. I never even came back for the funeral the proper way. I closed my eyes. I thought about the kiss on the top of my head the day of the will reading. The kiss that had felt like a goodbye. I thought about how love, real love, the kind my grandmother had spent 47 letters and 3 treasury bonds trying to teach me, is the kind that lets people come back. Yes, Sterling, I said softly, you come for Christmas, bring something for the cat. He laughed. He cried a little. We hung up. I sat in the kitchen for a long time after that, watching the afternoon light move across the floor. That evening, I walked through the archive one last time before bed. The lamps were low, the shelves stood quietly. 140 years of voices kept safe. In the center of the room, on the wall above Clara Caldwell's writing desk, hung a framed photograph. Grandma Opal standing on the front porch of this house in 1973. She was 25 years old. Her hair was still dark then. Her shoulders were straight. Her eyes were looking right into the camera, and there was a softness in her mouth, like she already knew somehow that someday a girl named Ren would stand in this room and look up at her. I stopped in front of the photograph. I touched the edge of the frame. You were right, Grandma, I whispered. I am home. The room was quiet, but I felt the answer anyway. Not in words, in peace. Sterling came for Christmas. He brought Caroline. He brought a wool blanket for the cat. He brought his polished city shoes that were entirely wrong for a North Carolina hollow in December, and Della loaned him a pair of her late husband's work boots before he even made it to the porch steps. He stood in the parlor with his hands in his pockets for a long time, looking at the wedding photograph of Clara and Josiah. She looks like you, he said. She does not look anything like me. The mouth, Ren, the mouth is exactly the same. I had never noticed. I took him into the hidden room. He cried when he saw it. He cried again when he read the first letter, the one from when I was 4, the one with the candles. He sat at Clara's writing desk for an hour and a half, and he did not move. Caroline came and sat beside me on the parlor sofa. She put her hand over mine without looking at me. We sat that way for a long time. When Sterling came out of the hidden room, his face was wet and his shoulders were lower than I had ever seen them. Ren, he said, I am so sorry. I stood up. I crossed the parlor. I put my arms around my brother for the first time in my entire life. He was taller than me. He smelled like expensive aftershave and wood smoke from Della's fire. He held on for a long time. Welcome home, Sterling, I whispered. He laughed, wet and broken, into my hair. I think I needed to hear that, he said. We had Christmas dinner around the long oak table in the dining room. Della came, Tom and Loretta Mercer came, Doc Renfro came, Pastor Whitlock came. Silas carved the ham badly, and we all teased him about it. The candles burned low. The fire crackled. The grandfather clock ticked steadily in the parlor. Caroline asked me at one point, very quietly, do you ever miss her? I looked around the table at the people my grandmother had taught me to love, at the brother who had finally come home, at the man across from me who had taken my hand in a thunderstorm. Every day, I said. But she is everywhere in this house, so she is never very far. I want to leave you with one last thing tonight. Before you go, I want you to ask yourself, in the quiet, who the opal is in your life. Who chose you when no one else did? Who fought for you when you did not know they were fighting? Who saved letters you never got to read until you were ready? Who built a room in their heart and kept it ready for you? Sometimes the opal in our life is a grandmother. Sometimes it is an aunt, a neighbor, a teacher, a stranger who walked into a children's home one snowy December afternoon with a tin of cinnamon cookies. Sometimes the opal in our life is the woman we never even met, the one whose journals we found in an attic, the one whose quilt we found in a cedar chest with our initials stitched into the corner. Sometimes the greatest inheritance is not the money. It is not the house. It is not even the land. It is the proof finally that we were loved all along. If this story reached your heart tonight, I would be so grateful if you would subscribe to this channel. We share stories like this every week about hope, about second chances, about finding home in the places we least expect to find it. And I would love it if you would leave a comment and tell me about the opal in your life. Use their name, say it out loud. The people who fought for us deserve to be remembered. And there might be someone watching tonight sitting alone in a kitchen somewhere who needs to hear that the love was real, that it was always real. Thank you for staying with me. I will see you in the next story. Good night, sweetheart, and welcome home.